Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will just wait a few minutes for everyone for some other sort of attendees to join before we get started. But thank you very much for being here with us today. We'll just wait a couple of minutes. And during this webinar, feel free to use the Q&A box and the Q&A function to put in questions that you have to the different speakers and the different panelists. We would like this to be quite an interactive and lively sort of session where there can be some sort of discussion and where there can be different viewpoints being bandied around by different players in the extension realm. So that's a sort of a great thing that you could do to facilitate that sort of dialogue, is use that question and answer chat box. Yeah, we'll just wait a couple more minutes. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Scarlett Crawford and I'm working at the Commission on Sustainable Agriculture and Intensification, or CoSAI, and I'm working as part of the Secretariat as a project officer. So I will be moderating today's session, which is hosted by the Commission and GFRAS, and we're looking at pathways and instruments for sustainable intensification. We're looking at lessons for extension and advisory services from CoSAI. So we're going to start today with an introduction from our CoSAI Commissioner and a member of the GFRAS board, Rashid Suleiman V, who will set the stage for today's dialogue. And then we'll go on to hearing two presentations from the experts working on CoSAI's emerging evidence. And we will then move to our three panel speakers for their insights and experiences in extension and advisory services. So go ahead, Rashid. Feel free to start. Thanks.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rashid Suleiman. I work with the Center for Research on Innovation and Science Policy based in India. And I am one of the commissioners of CoSAI. So on behalf of the CoSAI and the GFRAS, I welcome you all to this side event. And in this brief presentation, I would like to give an overview of what CoSAI is about, this Commission on Sustainable Agriculture Intensification. And I think all of us now currently recognize the importance of transformative changes in the food systems, because we need to enhance access to quality, nutritious food. We also wanted to protect the natural environment as far as possible. And we also wanted to promote resilient livelihoods. This CoSAI is all about this. Coming to I just wanted to say, what is this commission? This commission was set up in 2019 by the CGIAR, and its main purpose is to provide more and better evidence. We wanted to have evidence on how to put maybe more and better investments in innovation for sustainable agricultural food systems. And this commission is composed of 21 commissioners selected from the global south who have experience of working in this area, who are scientists, experts, or policy makers. And what the commission has done is, commission has have to get evidence on these aspects related to higher and better investments for innovation in sustainable agricultural food systems. It commissions studies. It commissions studies on funding, on what is the current status of funding for innovation in sustainable intensification. It also commissions studies to understand, or maybe to draw lessons on successful pathways which have been scaled up, and which is trying to promote the three broad goals: social, environmental, and economic goals of sustainable SDGs, and also studies on instruments and approaches that needs to be implemented if you really wanted to have better impact of the investments. And we also have a trying to develop principles to understand how whether an investment we are making is meeting the needs of the broader objectives of sustainable agricultural intensification. So I think I will just coming to the kind of a lessons from CoSAI. One is, as we all know, because we need to have more funding in the area of innovation, especially in the area of agriculture sector. But the point is, it is not merely the higher investments. We also need to reorient the current funding to promote sustainability, because we cannot only invest. We wanted to broaden the outcomes of our investment. It is not merely about economic kind of objectives. We also need to get a much more impact in terms of the social and environmental objectives. And for this purpose, CoSAI developed a principles and metrics for investments, because we need to know ex ante how an investment is going to impact on these kind of the goals related to sustainable agricultural intensification. So CoSAI developed a scoring tool, a kind of a metrics to help ex ante understand the potential impact of investments in innovation. Another major lesson coming out from the study is about the kind of where are we investing? Because the studies have been showing that about $60 billion is being invested for innovation in agriculture, but only 7% of that is meeting the environmental objectives. And even only half of that is meeting the social objectives coming out from these investments. And there are also significant funding gaps related to areas in terms of post-harvest local seed systems, natural resource management. We also need to have investments at the farm level in terms of not only for rural extension, but also for value chain development. So there are many areas in which we need to enhance our investment. This is another lesson coming from the CoSAI. Probably this is the thing which is more related to the today's discussion in terms of what can we learn from successful projects, successful pathways. What are the broad lessons? How they have achieved the varied goals of sustainable intensification, and we developed a set of principles or good practices related to leadership. We have seen that these are the kind of principles. It has mechanisms for building trust, bundling instruments, not merely only technology, but in terms of access to finance, access to markets, mechanisms for user engagement from the beginning to the end of the initiative. And all these kind of projects have been showing that the partnerships have been the key for the successful cases. We have seen from the successful cases of intensification, so agricultural intensification. Second aspect is related to the design and appropriate investments for innovation. We have two presentations coming, one from Bridget and the other from the Lucian, talking about these two aspects in detail. And we also have a study on the role of extension and financial services, which talks about the importance of enhancing investments in maybe we need to have more people, we need to have more investments in the rural credit. So I think these are broadly the kind of evidence coming from CoSAI. And I would like all of you to visit the CoSAI website when you wanted to have get more information on this. So I think this meeting is organized because we believe that there's a lot of lessons that are coming out for how we organize extension better, and there are sort of lessons coming from this CoSAI studies evidence. Thank you very much. Over to you, Scarlett.
Thanks very much, Rashid. Well, that was really good to get sort of an overview of CoSAI's contribution to transformative changes and the evidence we're building and the lessons we're sort of learning. So to go into a deeper dive there, well, you did firstly mention the new CoSAI report that looks at how extension services can contribute to better investments and better outcomes and impacts. But now we'll look at another study, which Bridget Leddy from the Institute of Natural Resources will present, that looks at CoSAI's approaches and instrument study. So go ahead, Bridget. Thanks.
Thank you, Scarlett, and thanks, Rashid, for the introduction. Can you just confirm that you can see my presentation in slide mode?
Everything is great. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity to share some of our findings. The presentation today is around instruments for supporting both effective innovation and extension, given the context of today's side event. As it's been mentioned, an INR-led team was appointed to explore instruments that could provide either financial or non-financial or combinations of both support to innovation processes. And the idea was that would lead to transformation of the sector to focus on multiple benefits. So when we talk about sustainable agriculture intensification, we're talking about interventions, food systems, practices that have social, human well-being, environmental, economic, and productivity targets or impacts that one's seeking. Through the study, we identified 3 types of instruments. The first are those instruments that primarily support entrepreneurship, and within that category, we had incubators, accelerators, and innovation hubs. I haven't focused on them today, although they clearly do offer opportunities for technology development and possibly some transfer, but I think less direct relevance for agricultural advisory services. The next 2 categories were those that provide financial support and those that support innovation within real life context. And I'll talk a little bit more to those. And then the last point I wanted to make on this slide is the importance of the role of brokers or innovation intermediaries. The need for individuals or organizations that facilitate linkages, often between farmers and, for example, markets or knowledge holders. And that becomes more clearly a need within the innovation system. If we talk about the relevance of these instruments for the context of extension or advisory services, I think we should just start by highlighting that by extension, we're talking broadly, we're looking at public services, private sector, for example, related to value chain support, or we're looking at the support provided by NGOs. And if one looked at the traditional technology transfer process, then you would see extension agents acting as intermediaries, taking research outputs, passing them on to farmers, perhaps taking farmers' needs and passing them back to research. But we're all aware, I think, that there are some limitations to that traditional system. Firstly, technologies aren't always suited to farmers' needs, and that's primarily because they're not always developed with farmers. Another challenge is that the focus is generally on technical solutions without looking at changes in institutional arrangements or new policies, for example, that are required to bring about transformation. And I think we're all aware that scaling of new technologies is limited. So the purpose of today was to say, well, which of these instruments that we have looked at could bring new innovations into use? So if we look at those that provide financial support, I've included 3 of the instruments we came across. The first are innovation funds for smallholder farmers, which are basically funds that get put into the hands of farmers or local artisans. It might be via a farmers association or via a local structure, but the idea is that farmers, smallholder farmers, have funds to support their innovation processes. And an example of that would be local innovation support funds that were promoted by Polynova in a number of countries some years back. We could also look at prizes and awards, and those generally incentivize innovation without covering the cost of the innovation process. And an interesting case here would be the National Innovation Foundation in India, which has annual awards for unassisted grassroots innovation. The third case here are results-based contracts. This is an example of an impact investment where you have 3 parties involved, and basically you have a third party that undertakes to reimburse all the costs of implementation if preset or predetermined outcomes are achieved. And that's also starting to look quite interesting. They're normally in terms of development, less so in innovation, but I think we're seeing opportunities there too. If we look at the instruments that support innovation within real life contexts, then probably the most commonly, well, in fact, there are a few here that are commonly known. The first one we'll talk about are innovation platforms. And that's where you have networks of different actors coming together to collectively solve challenges, normally with a commodity focus. So for example, the International Livestock Research Institute had work around small stock innovation platforms in Mozambique. Then we can go on to living labs, which is another instrument that sees testing of new technologies or development of new technologies within real life contexts. And we looked specifically at climate smart villages, which had been introduced through the CCAPS project, the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Initiative. And that was basically testing climate smart agricultural practices within geographic locations. The next one is farmer research structures. And here we could be talking about farmer research networks as are supported by McKnight's, which look to network large numbers of farmers that are involved in research. Or we could be looking at the local agricultural research committees in Latin America, specifically still functioning in Honduras, which are members of farming communities who conduct research on behalf of the communities within which they work. And the last one here are farmer field schools, which are group-based learning approaches with regular sessions across the production cycle. And while they were initially used mainly in cropping systems, we are now seeing them being used within other enterprises as well. For example, IFAD has a lot of experience with livestock-focused farmer field schools. And I thought it was also interesting to note that there's now been the establishment of an East Africa hub to allow for sharing between people involved with farmer field schools. So what could the role of an extension agent or an advisory department be in this process or making use of these instruments? So I think the first role, there's definitely a role for extension staff to act as an intermediary or an innovation broker, providing links to people with ideas, to people with knowledge, people with resources, perhaps markets. We could also see extension playing a role as a facilitator of an innovation platform or a farmer field school. They could support the testing of new technologies against current practices. So as a slight alternative to demonstrations, which are normally or commonly used, one could look at some form of farmer experimentation. They could provide funding for farmer innovation. And lastly, they could identify and share farmer innovations, either as solutions to challenges that they're aware of within the communities that they serve, or to feed them through to researchers because they need some additional support, for example. So I've got a few slides of some key conclusions that I think would come out of the study with relevance for extension or advisory services. The first is that most of these instruments make use of multi-stakeholder processes. And in order for them to be sustainable, it's really important to make sure that there are felt benefits for all actors to ensure participation, because there's always a cost. It's a cost for the farmer to attend. It's a cost for an industry partner to attend. So we've got to make sure that there are real benefits for them in order to keep them interested. We need to be very aware of asymmetrical power dynamics within those multi-stakeholder partnerships. So how do we stop one actor hijacking the process? How do we stop the actor that introduced it, for example, who has their own agenda, dominating the process? So that obviously requires strong facilitation skills. Value chain development seems to be needs to be an integral part of any intervention, whichever instruments are used. There needs to be efforts to also support market participation if one really wants to have an impact on people's livelihoods. So for example, with a farmer field school, how do we also address market participation rather than just looking at new technologies, for example? We need to look at appropriate technologies, and this came up earlier. We need to be developing technologies with farmers, but we also need to remember that if we're going to take them to another area with a different context, they may well need to be tweaked in order to be appropriate. The value of farmer-to-farmer extension is also recognized, but we've also come across evidence that the diffusion of information beyond the farmers that are primarily involved in the activity isn't always as good as one might expect. And that's because a lot of the knowledge gained is through experiential learning. And how do we allow other farmers to also have some form of experiential learning rather than just hearsay? We need to recognize the heterogeneity of smallholder farmers, because if we talk about, for example, an innovation platform, having farmers represented, who are they? Which groups of smallholders do they represent? Are we seeing women and women's needs being brought to the table? Are we seeing the less well-resourced people being able to participate in these instruments? And that really needs to be targeted in the design of those instruments. And we need to think about the complexity that farmers are dealing with. And there was a comment earlier about bundling instruments, which I think I'll also talk to later, but it's also about bundling innovations. So for example, if you come up with a new tool or a new implement that has a cost, perhaps you need to look at introducing or helping farmers organize themselves so that they can share that equipment. So that's where this bundling becomes essential. Farmer-centered development is something that most of the instruments are aiming to achieve. They're wanting to see farmers or local artisans as active innovators in the innovation process, not just recipients of the products of those processes.
Bridget, can I just jump in and say we just have a little bit, yeah, there's not that much time left.
Okay, sure. This is my last 3 points, so okay. Thanks, Scarlett. So I think it's just important to note that if extension departments are going to adopt new approaches and make use of these kind of instruments, they're really going to have to look at structural changes within them, changes to the organizational mandate, changes to the types of incentives that are offered, building of the necessary skills and competencies. And there's also a need to recognize that if we're going to operationalize these new instruments, there's a cost. Not just the capacity building, but also the transaction costs for all partners that are involved in participating or applying that instrument. And lastly, I just wanted to make the point, come back to this idea of the 5 principles of sustainable agricultural intensification, and say, most of the instruments that we've seen, even if they aren't currently being used for or addressing those principles, there really are opportunities to design them in a way that allows. So for example, the criteria that are being used to select innovations for funding, we need to make sure that they talk to those 5 principles. So that brings me to the end, and I'd just like to thank my research team that we've been working together for a few months now, and it's been a really rewarding process. And I'd like to thank the CoSAI Secretariat and commissioners for their valuable input too. Thanks very much.
No, thanks very much, Bridget. I think that was really interesting to look at those 2 sort of categories of instruments, those that sort of provide the financial support, but also those that, provide support in innovation in real life contexts, and to see some of the lessons that look at how extension staff can go beyond being that sort of traditional intermediary that brokers knowledge, but also can support testing new technologies and sharing farmer innovations. And I think that some of the key lessons you talked about, including the need to recognize that innovation processes are multi-stakeholder, and they need to sort of serve everyone, as well as looking at how farmer to farmer extension has to go beyond sort of knowledge sharing and knowledge capture from the original sort of participants or end users to bring in experiential learning and to understand the system more wholly, is something that would be really interesting and relevant for the audience. So thanks very much again. And we'll just go on to the next presentation by Luciane Quiote-Bacchione, who is the researcher and investigator from Agriocione in Brazil. And she's looking at the innovation pathway study. So thanks for providing your insights here, Luciane.
Thank you for the presentations and for the invitation, Scarlett. I will share my screen with you, and let me know if you can see.
Mm-hmm.
1 minute. Can you see?
Yep, that's perfect. If you just put it on big screen sort of thing, full screen.
Good morning, and thanks for the invitations and the opportunity to talk about the relevant subject as the extension service is. Today, I'm presenting a success case of extension services in Brazil, the Full Booked project. And looking at the sustainable agriculture intensification, innovation success cases within an agriculture extension setting to determine which factors lead to success. And the Full Booked project was the innovation case in extension services selected by CoSAI in the study conducted by Agroecony. And today I will talk a little about the pathways and the lessons learned with this case. That is very important in order to achieve the sustainable agriculture intensifications and receive a lot of to achieve comments and to lessons learned to other countries. The Full Booked project methodology was developed for Brazilian milk production context. It's very important to understand the Brazilian context to develop this methodology. The milk sector in Brazil is very diverse and fragmented. There are 1 million of milk farmers in Brazil, and most of them are family farmers, around 85% of them.
Sorry.
Sure.
Can I just ask you to put your presentation on full screen?
Is in a full screen? Sorry, I think that you can see. You can see now?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So there are 1 million of milk farmers in Brazil, and most of them are family farmers, around 85%, with a small number of calls by farmers, around 10 on average. So in this context, the Full Booked project aims to promote the sustainable development of dairy cattle farming through an innovative technological transfer methodology. And what are the main components of this innovation extension service project? The dairy farmers are as used as a practical classroom. It's a kind of learning school, different from traditional extension service, which prioritizes the cutting-edge technologies. For example, in the extension services, in balde cheio, technology already now are combining and adapted to each farming reality. And the main focus of program is training of local technicians in order to achieve a high scale and a high spillover effect. So, to understand the balde cheio process, the sequential and the incremental technology introductions, the main steps of this methodology is the first one is the farm diagnosis. So, after the technology, package is recommended according to the farm knowledge, the knowledge already knowledge by farmers, like production systems, managed genetic agronomic practices, combining with different farming practices in different contexts with local farming knowledges. For example, extensive milk productions or milk extension productions with intensive production. So it's the technology package is adapted according to the farmer systems. And after the plan for introduction of technology is planned between technicians and the farmers, and based on the capital available, the herd size, the technology is implemented step by step in a small part of the farmer, in order to adapt the technology and to each context and get experience with that. These figures highlight the role of each organization in the extension services process. For example, the Embrapa is the technical coordinator, and it's responsible for training other local coordinators that here we call it master trainers. And the master trainers are responsible for training the local extension agents through demonstrative units and practical training, practical class in the demonstrative units. After the capacitation, the extension, the technical, the local technicals are able to give extension service with quality and continuous to a lot of farmers. So this kind of methodology, we have a high spillover, and we have a high number of extension services and the technical training to give technical assistance to a lot of different farmers and the different kind of farmers and to different regions. So the main results of a full booked project are in 2009, there were 1,690 properties in the project in 476 Brazilian municipalities and 90 Brazilian states. So the problem covered most of Brazilian states and a lot of Brazilian municipalities. The program had 179 partnerships among cooperatives, farmers associations and federations, NGOs, local governments, in milking industries and the others. The main impacts of the farmers participating on the program were an increase of productivity of farmers by 3 times during the first 3 years. The milk production by day increased by 40%, an increase in labor performance by 37%, a decrease in the land area used for milk production by 7%, and an increase of milk price by around 7%. The main environmental benefits was the improvement of animal welfare, the product and the soil quality. And the successful of balde cheio for safe pathway involving the bookkeeping tool. So it's very important for farmers so they can have a better management of the property and the production process. So it's a very important thing tool for farmer reflections and the management and to have a good management of their properties. The bottom-up extension service that is adapted the process to individual complexity and the different farming realities, and finds innovative solutions through recombining knowledge technologies. Is not a cutting edge technology, but is a knowledge technology. And the learning units, trailing and the experimenting at the farming level. This strategy is of conducting small trials at the farm level is central to this type of program. Well-developed experimentation phase contributes to a strong learning process. And the trainers in order to multiply the effect and to achieve a high number of extension services, the grassroots and the local government institutions, the engagement and the reality and the users. So it's very important to engage in the grassroots and the local government institutions as partnership to engagement the end users. And the networking. So the networking is very important because the development of a network of farmers and technicians across the country and the periodic visits made by balde cheio coordinators to all regions make an intense circulation of knowledge. This is very important to change information among actors and among farmers, and to adapt and to transfer experience among farmers. The continuous improvement of tools and process is very important to meet the end users and the farmers' needs and the market needs. So it is very important to the maturity of a program and the continuous of a program. And the use of different training platforms. For example, the presential and e-learning platforms, that this e-learning platform was used by, has been used by Embrapa during the pandemic, and a high number of technicians can access this kind of the service assistance courses. And this is the combining different types of platform is very important to achieve a high number of technicians. So it's very important to have a high spillover effect. And the combination of these elements is responsible for the maturity and the continuity of balde cheio for more than one decade. So the full bucket is a very successful case of extension service in Brazil. And we can take a lot of lessons learned of these cases that can apply it to other regions or other agriculture sectors. But it's very important to consider the context of countries and the context of other sectors. So it's not possible to disconnect this the extension service of the context of country and the agriculture sector.
Thank you very much, Luciane.
Obrigada.
Obrigada. Well, I thought that was really interesting to look at those sort of learnings and see how we had an extension model that, had been developed, but then was also, I guess, adapted to the different farms' diagnosis. And it had this sort of, I guess, structure within this pathway to innovation where we have the model, then we adapt it to the farm's different sort of diagnosis, as you said. And then you go through combining both formal knowledge and also the farming practices and the local knowledge that comes from the local context. And I think going from this contextual and formal knowledge, you can sort of plan then how the technology and the innovation will be introduced into that kind of context. And that really has like implications for impact and this sort of thing. And in terms of your key learnings, I think, or your key lessons, I think really the point that you made about learning units and how the type of learning units can sort of bring, I suppose, higher levels of impact. I suppose it's sort of looking at economies of scale in a way, which also links to your other lesson learnt, which you touched upon, which looked at training the trainer and how that sort of elicits a multiplier effect. And I think this multiplier effect can also tie into what Bridget's presentation sort of said earlier, which looks at sort of getting past just the end users. Of course, we want the multiplier effect to target the end users, but going beyond that to get the experiential learning from all actors in the innovation process. And I think that the extension model from the Full Bucket program really touches on that. So thanks very much for your presentation. We will now move on to the panel discussion, where we'll have Mary Ord-Even, who will be speaking from a technical sort of IFAD perspective. We'll have Dr. Patience B. Ramigisa, who is the head of the Division of Agricultural Extension Coordination in the Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Industry Fisheries, and Dr. Marcelo Correa de Silva, who is a visiting professor and part of the Agribusiness program. So I'll start with the first question. And so to all of our panelists, if you don't mind putting your videos on so we can see who you are and say hello. So having listened to the first presentation regarding the different approaches and instruments, and then looking at the second presentation on the pathways to innovation that can be sort of supported by extension services, can you describe to us the experiences that you have had with these instruments and pathways and the lessons that you've learned from using them? So I think we could start potentially with you, Mary Ord, if that's fine.
That is fine with me. So thank you very much for the question. So on my side, so I'm working for IFAD, which is an international finance institutions for the UN specialized in rural development and poverty. So innovation is very important to our project, notably with a strong focus on community-driven innovations and making work through the last mile for rural farmers and for rural poor. So I found very relevant the two presentations that were shared, and I think in many of our projects, we do implement a number of similar innovation pathways. First, on the financial side, I mean, many of our projects have innovation funds, call for matching grants with different partners, dedicated participatory research investment, price and impact investment. Now we have a private sector window, so we more and more also invest in various blended finance instruments on different ways and so forth. Then the second part is the networks and platform. Many of our projects also try to trigger innovations within multi-stakeholders value chain platform from the local or national level, research extension platform, and landscape regional mechanism as well to inform and discuss that regional across similar landscape, like we've done in Mekong Delta. And the other path is we work also closely with farmers organizations to lead and support innovations and so forth. And I like the point on learning units as well. We have living labs, we say with Climate Smart Village and integrated farming system and so on, and farmer field school. So what are the lessons we've learned across this different experience? First, as mentioned in the presentations, innovations are context specific and often farmer specific. So it's a big challenge in our project that sometimes are countrywide and target hundreds of thousands of farmers, how we identify the right innovations that can be adapted to different agroecological contexts, socioeconomic, farmers, and with climate change that change every season. So to address that, I think really what we found important as a second lesson is the importance of these community-driven innovations, how we can empower local level to really address this complexity and see what works best for them. I really like the concept of experiential learning, how we can really empower farmers to really identify, innovate, and see what works best, and work with community, because part of change is also social and behavioral. So that's a very big part of their investment, working on community-driven innovations. And also the lesson 3 is on how we address diversity within communities, because people are different. Our target group are often the most remote, marginal, indigenous people. So it's not a given just you make them participate that we'll consider them. So analytical tools are important, being attention to constituent groups, different ones that participate. But also I like the points by the participants on farmers' diary, bookkeeping, how we empower farmers themselves to see what works best in their own situation. Lesson 4, I'll go fast because I see I'm up to my time, is that the scaling and the sustainability requires really this investment in the last mile implementation capacities, whether these learning units, farmers organization, community groups. We need to really invest in building the communities at a local level and diversify partnership. And second, to associate this community-driven and local investment with a dual approach of network, working with farmers organization, knowledge documentation, to be able to scale and see what works and scale in other approach. Digital tools seems very promising in different instances if they are really owned by the communities and used to support this experiential learning. And we need to encourage also innovation within our own agency. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, Mary. I think that it was interesting that a lot of your experiences really revolved around the community and how to adapt the innovation to the community to make sure that they are active in the innovation process and to recognize their heterogeneity within the community. So thanks very much. You can leave your camera on, and I just encourage people to, while we're here, add some sort of questions into the question and answer chat function if you have any for the panelists and speakers. But sorry, I just turned my camera on. But I would just like to go to Marcelo. Marcelo, would you like to respond to the question and provide some of your insights on the sort of lessons you know? Yeah.
Thank you, Scarlett. Good morning, everyone. Good morning here in Brazil. Well, regarding my experience and the lessons I've learned from using what was presented, I would like to say that first, I'm very happy to see that the content of the presentations are pretty aligned with the worries and fears I have when we talk about intensification. I found it really interesting when Bridget mentioned the multi-stakeholder process and her key conclusions, mentioning that we need to ensure the felt benefits for all actors to ensure participation. This rang a bell in different ways. In the projects I collaborated here in Brazil, working with urban and peri-urban vegetable farms, we were able to verify that awareness was crucial. And when people learned that they had to pull money and they had to push food, or when the distributors, the retailers, the consumers, the processors, the farmers, they had a role on pushing money or pulling money or pushing food in the chain, the project worked better. So they have specific roles and social roles, environmental and economic roles to facilitate movement of food in the supply chain. And if they have awareness, then the project works well. The challenge is bringing awareness to people that are not aware of the consequences of purchasing food in these short supply chains, and especially in the developing countries. So in this sense, what caught my attention in the statement of ensuring felt benefits for all actors to ensure participation is that, interestingly, this can go the other way around. because participation can be the key to ensure the felt benefits of all, instead of ensuring that everyone knows their role in order to have participation. So I'm certain that this is aligned with the presentations and what was brought today by CoSAI. To make it clearer, we are always reflecting on whether it's innovation that leads to participation or if it's participation that actually leads to innovation. So we're always talking about innovation. It can be supported by community participation. And then again, yes, innovation is a pathway to ensure and generate participation. Also, when Bridget, just the last comment here on this question, Bridget mentioned the conclusions about recognizing heterogeneity among smallholders, again, to ensure participation. And she mentioned also the structural changes. It reminded me about a situation in the rural settlement here in central Brazil, where the extension staff was trained to work with integrated pig farming system. Housing was all in this typical industrialized integrated system, cement housing. And there was a farmer developing a pasture free range approach. He was starting business selling piglets at the end of the year for Christmas. And it was really emblematic because if we are assuming a farmer-centered development approach, all competencies and skills were required to guarantee inclusion and participation instead of convincing him to adopt an industrial approach. So instead of excluding him from the project, we had to work in order to include him in the project. And I think that's interesting for funding because they have to address heterogeneity and not exclude or promote homogeneity. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Marcelo. I think it is really interesting, this kind of idea of whether innovation leads to participation or does participation lead to innovation. And it's sort of a good sort of segue from the last response from Mary, who talked about sort of, I suppose, community involvement and this sort of stuff and how we actually drive that. I think really contextualization does have a big hand in whether participation drives the innovation or whether innovation is driving the participation. And I think aligning both of them is sort of important in really achieving the impact. So thanks very much for that response. Patience, would you like to respond now? I'll hand it over to you. You're just on mute at the moment, Patience, so.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, and for these two wonderful presentations. And for me, I will talk from the public sector perspective and policy perspective regarding the issue of innovations and the various instruments can be used to facilitate innovation. And when you look at the extension system globally and locally, it has undergone a number of changes, from public sector supply-driven to educational, to participatory, to demand-driven, to pluralism. Now, all these systems are aimed at facilitating innovation uptakes. However, when you look at over the years, especially for us in Africa, you'll find that the smallholder farmers are so diverse. The heterogeneity is big, and therefore you need different pathways, technology pathways to reach the different types of farmers, categories of farmers, and therefore you need locally validated technologies to be able to facilitate uptake. And we have as well in our processes bundled a number of technology innovations in order to facilitate these technology uptakes. In Uganda, for example, we have used the farmer field schools, the village agent model, the model farm approach, the nuclear farm model, the farmer-to-farm approach. All these have been applied, and many others have been applied to facilitate technology innovations. But as the presenters have also put it, you'll see that the level of technology uptake, when you look at the number of innovations that are available, and the uptake is so low. And this, of course, is influenced by a number of factors. The number of factors, some are institutional cultures, as well as the cultures of communities. You'll find we have also not put into account the political economy of institutions that facilitate technology uptake. So as we move forward in terms of getting innovations and all these technology pathways work, we also need to put into account understanding, because most of the time we concentrate on the technical aspects, but we pay less attention on the political economy that surrounds the institutions that we work with to facilitate innovations. And the fact that agriculture extension is a bridging institution, it is therefore important that we do understand the political economy that surrounds the institutions from which innovations, knowledge, and technologies flow. But also, on the other hand, we have also observed that those innovations that are taken up by where farmers participate, where farmers have interest, have a high chances of being taken up and utilized. So the lessons we learn is that one is that while at local level we've been able to experiment and make at small scale, when you are able to, we have been able to experiment these innovations. At scaling, it becomes a big problem. And one of the main problem is the capacity of the different actors along these agricultural value chains. And getting that multi-stakeholder platforms to get these actors to discuss and identify their problems and manage them is something that has been difficult to undertake. And largely, I think because the actors have different interests, and bringing them to have a common understanding and belief has been a challenge to us. So in the process, scaling up some of these innovations has not been easy. The other aspect, I think, but the main challenge, I think, which we need to address as we go forward from the lessons we have learned in terms of implementing these innovations, is that issue of capacity. And the other one is, given even this COVID-19 pandemic, the use of digital solutions to address, to facilitate technology diffusion has become more and more important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patience. I think what you've actually touched on in terms of the political economy of the institutions and sort of looking at the actual enabling environment of extension services themselves, and how these, I suppose, enabling environments with the political economy can sort of impact, and it can either hinder or propel the innovation environment and extension services, and how they can actually work within the institutions to support impact and to actually be that bridging service. And I think, addressing the issue of capacity, it is very difficult in terms of, addressing all of the heterogeneity and being able to cover all of the different actors and make sure that all the end users are participatory, as Marcelo pointed out, and how to engage that participation and sort of drive it forward. And, looking to digital solutions, I think, we do need to use them and also recognize where they're helpful and where they have their limitations. And so how we can sort of bring all of these together to actually strengthen extension and advisory. So with that, we'll move on to the second question, and we'll look at the instruments and approaches. So which instruments and approaches and elements of successful pathways can you see as being applicable to your extension work that you haven't yet engaged with, though that you think could be used in a project or in the context that you're working with? So what haven't you used that you would like to use at this point? Patience, would you like to go first, or?
Well, we have deployed quite a range of methodologies and approaches to facilitate technology uptake.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look in Uganda here, as I mentioned earlier, there are those instruments that we have employed to facilitate the public sector, but also those are instruments that we employ to facilitate the private sector. And when you look at the levels and of uptake now, for example, we have used the farmer field schools.
Mm-hmm.
And our observation has also been that they are very resource heavy to implement.
Yes.
The farmer field schools are resource heavy, and therefore we have not been able to successfully scale them up to at scale.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They take a long period of time, and keeping people on board over that period of time to appreciate and take up these technologies using the same method is not something that is easy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We worked out another method called the village agent model, which we worked with the USAID. And the village agent model was intended to create incentives in the system and make sure a village agent becomes the fine facilitator of business between farmers and other value chain actors, and would be earned on a commission. But what we also observed with this is that you need to build trust.
Mm-hmm.
And this model only worked in communities where trust was been built among the different actors. The other one we have deployed is the nuclear farmer model, which has been done at scale with under the support from IFAD with the oil palm project. And when you look at that model, it is very good, but the long-term sustainability becomes, because it is largely public sector supported. The model is private sector driven,
Mm-hmm.
but also largely public sector mediated. So, but it has been implemented over the last 10 years or so. But you see, in terms of the technology diffusion has been good. Farmers have adopted the technologies, they have been able to implement, but the issue of, in terms of what we are trying now to see is in terms of long-term sustainability, because some of the services are still funded by government, but we want this model, when the government moves out, we need to be able to sustain itself.
Yes.
If government moves out. So we have looked, farmers have been able to organize themselves, they have been able to have the savings, but the ability to make the private sector, both the private sector and the farmer organizations, if government moves out in terms of infrastructure, will the private sector take it up? If government moves out in terms of extension service provision, will the farmers be able to fund for this? That is something that we are still looking at and studying. But now what we also used another model, especially in terms of which we have experimented with Makerere University. It's called the Skills Products Entrepreneurship Developed Entities and Accreditation Model. It's called the SPEDA model in short. This has also, the results also show us that the model in terms of, because what happens is that the community enrolls or an individual will enroll with an enterprise to develop, and the university and the extension service builds capacity, helps this person to develop a business plan, build work with him throughout until the enterprise runs.
Mhm.
And once the enterprise is running, that is when he can also get a certificate in that training. If, for example, it is piggery, they will have to make sure that they work out together and business plan on how to run the piggery, and the farmer makes that investment decision, invest in the piggery, and our job as extension service support this farmer until his piggery project is running. And what is running, now he can get a certificate from the university that he has qualified in that enterprise. So we have found it is one of the new innovations that the university has come up with, but it is one of the promising ones that we are trying to look at. So
Okay.
I will not describe all because of time, but I think when it comes to the lessons that we draw from this is one is that whatever innovations we try to make, will only the uptake is higher when the interests of the farmer are addressed first.
Mhm, mhm.
But in most cases, we look at when we are setting up our programs and projects, we look at our own at the state institutions and their interests.
Mhm, mhm.
But we don't look at the interests of the farmer. So the farmer is really at the center. Even when we look at these reforms we have always been taking, the farmer is really at the center of decision making. So, but by making some of these small pilots, where we have involved the farmer to participate in making decisions and investment, we have seen a high rate of uptake of innovations. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. I think it is really interesting because we have seen that we do need to put farmers and end users, their needs first to drive that kind of scaling. But then, as you mentioned, then later down the line, in terms of the sustainability of the project, I suppose like how we can initially get good scaling by addressing farmers' needs, but then also get that longevity and the sustainability of, sorry, I'm just turning my camera on, the sustainability of the project after the government wants to move out. So how can we sort of, you know, strengthen and address the needs of the users, you know, that are facilitating the project. So I think that's really interesting. And I saw Mary and Marcella, you were both nodding. So would you like to sort of respond there or just continue going on and developing your responses?
Mary, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, actually, I wanted to react from the first presentation of patients. I think I share a lot of the points I had prepared actually along the same challenges and ideas that patients brought up. So first, I really like the point. I think it's really a big challenge is when you have this countrywide perspective or large perspective is how we address this heterogeneity. I think we all convey and agree on that. And so I think what we need to invest a little bit more, because I mean, we already invest in the different innovations that were proposed. So I think it's more about improving them. So one is to address better this heterogeneity. And I think one thing promising is how we have more investment in mapping the different agroecological and socioeconomic contents, and then the typology of rural household. How do we have this different categorization and have clear in mind, who are the different rural households we are targeting? And I like the Brazil example, and we have similar experience in France in the livestock network on typical farms system that are then put together against the census of agriculture, the agri statistics, to see, to have representations that are statistically relevant, but to really have concrete rural households model and demonstration that can really help us grasp the actual issues. Then it's also about screening innovations to make sure, because sometimes we promote innovations funds and things, and then we have research-driven initiatives or initiatives that cannot ever be uptaken by farmers because they require a lot of investment and there is no credit needs and so on. So we have to be much more thorough in the way we screen innovations and ensure they can really meet farmers' needs and constraints. Also because farmers don't have only income constraints. Sometimes the nutrition is more important, sometimes resilience if there is big risk, rather than just optimizing the yield. So it's really important to screen that better and show meaningful engagement. I really like this point, how you put farmers at the center and you always have this feedback. I think it's also a good lesson of just business model. The business model can be even for private sector. The core issue, if you want to have a sustainable business and including extension, you need to meet your target customers' needs, and you need to have strong engagement and delivery mechanism to know your feedback. Every private sector conducts surveys to ensure their customers are happy. That's a basic of any working business. And I think in extension and advisory, we need to have the same mindset. We need to also see how we serve our farmers and have good feedback channels to make sure we have good and targeting engagements. And I also like, along this heterogeneity, I think it's also about really empowering farmers themselves to be able to see what's best for them. So this issue of supporting records, minimum literacy, in my experience in Ghana, that was what was most transformative. In Northern Ghana, 95% illiteracy, but we did functional literacy in both local language and then English. And one of the core things that stayed after 10 years when I come back regularly is how they appreciated learning basics farm economics, how they were able to now do quick cost budgeting, cost benefit, break-even price, and being able to see what endeavors make sense for them. So I think this kind of aspects are very important points. The other point I really liked, and I think it's an important area to dig more, is the political economy and the issue of behavioral change, social norms, behavioral economics. I think we don't do enough on that and really need to integrate it because innovation is not neutral. I really like the point you put on the political economy of institutions. Yesterday, we had actually a strategic discussions within our department on innovations, and our lead director just made this presentation on behavioral obstacles to innovations. And one of the important points is bias, what do they call it? Confirmation bias, is that, with the same data, people will interpret it in a way that fits their own mandates and views, whatever the evidence is against you. If you already have a view of how it should work, you will interpret it this way. So unless sometimes we really change the mindset of people, they will always find ways to find evidence in their own way. So, and sometimes we see, when I was working in Ghana and so on, that people, extensionists sometimes will just have one view on the farmers. They'll say, oh, why don't the farmers do more rice and specialize and put more inputs? But they don't have the farming system perspective. So they don't understand that farmers have to manage different resources, have different constraints. They need to manage the labor. They need to manage with food security. So they have a narrow vision that is applied to one way. So I think it's really important to also work on this behavioral dynamics and really change people's perspective and have a better understanding and not too much bias against what's going on, to be more open to what works. And the last point I had, which I really like the points made also by patients on the different ways to reach the last mile, these different last mile capacities. What are the systems for sustainable last mile system? And we also did actually this mapping of different initiatives. I think the Uganda point was also part of our case study by my colleague Kutso. And we saw, like we have, as you said, we have both the social side, how we have engaged with big farmers, community workers, volunteers, groups, but we also have different approach that works with agripreneurs and farmers that try to start making an income out of providing advisory services. So we really need to reflect on what can be sustainable to the last mile, because we know public extension is not ever going to be enough. So how they can work and bridge with this last mile and build their capacities, and how we leverage digital innovations to empower further this last mile. I think these are really important entry points, as well as the bundled services, because to make values and sustain, we need to also link to the value chain, to rural finance, because farmers won't be able to adopt things if they don't have access to a range of other services, seeds, inputs, and so forth. And some promising models we saw had really strong partnership with banks, like the Community Managed Resource Center in India, that are partnering with banks to provide services to the farmers and being really a local community-driven service center. And that is reaching sustainability. So we really need to reflect when we talk about extension, what is the business model, what are the partnerships we need to leverage, what are the last mile system and the income we can raise so that this support lasts, because innovations is a long-term process. In one-time project, it's never enough. So how we build on this aspect. So that's, yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Marcelo, would you like to follow on from that?
Yes, Scarlett. Well, first I would like to make a quick comment on patients' talk, and then I will answer question 2, if that's okay.
Of course.
So first, I would like to reply patients' comment on capacity and scaling, because many policies that worked well in Brazil, they were designed to provide institutional markets to purchase food from family agriculture. And this is independent. I mean, they're not so worried of what they're producing and how much or how, the amount of what they are producing. So this is an important issue, because what worked in Brazil was not to choose a certain commodity so that the farmer becomes more specialized and increases the outputs, but to provide institutional markets. So farmers that are generalized, that they're not specialized, and they work with diversification, they can be included in the market. And this is put into schools and to other places, and it worked pretty well. So scaling and, I mean, capacity wasn't the problem. And Brazil also adopted a territorial approach that worked pretty well, because with the territorial approach, the policies were designed based on the potentialities and the bottlenecks. So it wasn't a matter of scaling, and it wasn't a matter of what the amount they were producing. It was concern of buying it and putting and including them in the market, and it worked pretty well. So maybe we can chat about this some other time. And then I jump on to the second question that I believe was about the approaches, the elements of success and pathways that I could engage with, but I'm not engaging with at the moment. And for this question, I would like to say that I actually consider myself a young researcher and a young extensionist. So yes, there's pretty much to put in practice. However, I think that to criticize myself on this, I think that I should take more time, more often, to talk with stakeholders, to talk with brokers, and to get to know the actors and develop these partnerships, for example, with the NGOs. This takes some time, and academics, as myself, we often stay in the university campus preparing scientific papers and teaching, and most of the times it's not our fault that we're hidden, we're inside the campus, but sometimes it's just more comfortable to stay in the campus and use the email and the telephone, and regularly there's no budget for the petrol, so I'm not aware of any Brazilian researcher or extensionist that doesn't often take part of their own salary to pay for expenditures. So it's quite difficult to say what I saw and what I'm not using, because we know the toolbox is big, we have a lot of methods, but the conditions, I mean, we struggle to put them in practice. Even so, I encourage scholars to make an effort and to balance their time so they can arrange this and meet people in person. We shouldn't restrict communication to emails. And the message on this is that we need to give partnership a chance. We need to consider visits and the eye-level contact and eye-level communication with the stakeholders and brokers more often. We need to train harder and harder to obtain funding from the public or the private initiative, even during crisis. So sometimes, yes, we're not able, we're not competent, we don't have all the abilities necessary to make it work. We have some stereotypes producing papers, some others are more eager to communicate, but doing everything at the same time in the conditions we have is a big challenge. And I don't think it's such a methodology problem. It's more the conditions it is. I mean, extension in Brazil, it's dismantled. The service is scraping. It's very, very difficult situation. So this is maybe an excuse, but it supports why we're not doing so many things. We do one thing at a time.
Well, I think that actually just goes back to what Dr. Patient sort of brought up about the political economy and the institutions and the political environment sort of thing, and how that can really encourage you both as sort of researchers to say, for example, not have to use your own money to go and make these connections and form these partnerships. But if there's that sort of support already there, the environment will foster that kind of learning and partnership building and this sort of stuff. So I think, as Patients brought up, the institutional environment is just as important as the technological, as the user end driven community kind of focus. Yeah, and I just want to sort of finish just with a question potentially to you, Patients. You just have a couple of minutes to answer this before Rashid sums up. But do you think, this has come from the chat, do you think that intensive agricultural practices can be assimilated sustainably without the active participation of the private sector? So I guess answering from the Ugandan public sector perspective, do you think that intensive agriculture can be done sustainably, or this innovation can be done sustainably without the private sector? You're just on mute, by the way. And you just have 2 minutes. Oh, you're still on mute though. Let me unmute you.
You are muted.
Yes, still mute. I can't unmute you. I'm not sure why.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, there we go. You just have
Yes.
1 minute to respond.
Yes, I think it is possible for having a sustainable agriculture intensification using the public sector. Because one is that in our country so far, the public sector remains the most dominant, and in terms of even sustainability, it remains the most dominant. So, and well organized up to the grassroots. What is important is how it can strengthen. What is important, how it can, one is strengthening the system, but also not forgetting that as it is working, it also partners with the private sector.
Okay.
That is the only way we can do that sustainability.
So you think the private sector is essential to really getting that sustainability?
Yes, yeah, you can have the public sector at the center, but it can work closely with the private sector.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that response. And I think I will just hand over to Rashid. We have a few minutes left to just give some sort of summaries and some lessons learned from this. Thanks,
Okay.
Rashid.
Thanks, Scarlett. I think we have a lot of interesting lessons coming out of this presentation, and also from the inputs from the panelists. But I just wanted to focus on maybe about 6 or 7 major points which I picked up, and which I believe is more important for extension and advisory services. I think one is, we heard about that innovation is context specific. So we heard about the importance of community-driven innovation, community-managed extension, and the need to empower farmers, because they should drive the process of innovation, and the importance of territorial approaches. So probably I think, especially when you talk about the diversity among the small farmers and their production context. So probably there is a lot more needs to be done in the area of community-driven innovation. Second question is also a kind of a challenging point, is about whether it is a participation that leads to innovation, or whether the innovation is leading to participation. And I think probably for the small farmers and those people who are in the remote regions, who are far-flung, living in the far-flung regions, perhaps I think it's the participation that should be leading to innovation and not the innovation that is leading to partnership. So I think this also means that we need to have diverse pathways, or maybe diverse directions of change, and we should have the tools and approaches that fits both these diverse pathways. And patients also mentioned about the trust building, because if you don't have the kind of a trust, it becomes especially it's difficult to sustain many of the initiatives which we are having. Another point is which I thought maybe it's coming out from the approaches and instruments and the number of tools, frameworks which we listened today. I believe that conventional public extension still focuses on a set of, they have a very fixed set of tools, or they operate with a very limited tools in their toolbox, which are conventionally demonstrations, training, mass media, mobile advisory through SMS, exposure visit, or maybe these days ensuring more woman participation in all these existing type of thing. But what we heard today is that we need to have a much broader range of approaches and instruments are needed. And we had a number of them in terms of logbooks, bookkeeping, local innovation funds, several funding instruments we talked about, then partnerships, capacity need assessment, public-private partnerships, business models, prices, incentives, learning units, farmer resource centers. So I think there is a number of different tools and approaches. I personally doubt that whether we are in our training extension is, as well as in the kind of education, in the faculty, in the agricultural education, I believe that no, we are not teaching, or maybe we are not including these kind of topics in the especially in teaching extension. So I think we need to broaden our toolbox. We need to have more and more tools and approaches and funding instruments which are important for us. Another thing is about the funding. I think definitely funding is important for scaling up. I think patients and many of you talked about the importance of lack of operational resources for doing extension work, engaging with the NGOs. So I think I believe funding is important, but I think probably more important is also in terms of what instruments we use to direct the funding. I think the CoSAI's evidence talks about what kind of principles, what kind of tools, what we could do in terms of probably the funding instruments are also equally important than to funding. Another thing is that probably there is a lot that we need to learn from what is happening across. I think we have seen the wide range of approaches in the case studies in Kenya, India, and Brazil. There's a lot many things which are happening, which are civil society led, which are not probably well documented. So there is a need to probably strengthen our understanding, strengthen the research in terms of drawing lessons from what is happening. And as I said, because several things happen with the private sector, several things happen with the public sector, with the private and the NGO, civil society sector, and producer organization sector. And in the next few days, we are going to hear about what are those innovations happening in the agroecology space. So I think we need to learn a lot more. And maybe my final point is about, okay, what does it all mean for GFRAS and its regional networks and the country fora? Because we have been very conscious about enhancing the capacities of, because development is an important aspect for extension, for the GFRAS and its network. We have been promoting this new extension is learning it because we realize the importance of the functional capacity development. But I think what we hear today is that no, that is important. But I think probably it's high time that we also need to look into the political economy context and the institutional barriers at the organizational and enabling environment level. And I believe these are some of the areas maybe for GFRAS and its network to consider, probably to look at in more detail in the coming days. And so I think I will stop here. And I think it is a very good, interesting session. I couldn't capture everything, but I just wanted to focus on a few things in my 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Over to you, Scarlett.
Thanks very much, Rashid, and thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. I think the insights were great, and it seemed that every sort of point of view brought together sort of something that reaffirmed or that fit in within the entire sort of system, and all of the perspectives sort of came together to sort of reinforce each other or support what each other was saying in different ways. So thanks everyone for your time, and thanks for joining us. We hope that this was a fruitful session for everyone, and yeah, have a great day wherever you are in the world. So
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Asante sana.
Okay.
Thank you.